Hello and welcome to Global Eye. I'm Parikshit Luthra. Russian President Putin has said that Russia has successfully tested a new strategic missile. While addressing analysts and journalists, he said Russia has almost completed work on its intercontinental ballistic missile system. Meanwhile, Russian forces have launched drone attacks on Ukraine's Kharkhiv region, killing over 50 people and injuring many. One of the attacks saw missiles slamming into a grocery store and a cafe where people had gathered to mourn a fallen Ukrainian soldier. The strikes also hit a residential building in Kharkiv, killing a 10-year-old boy and injuring nearly 30 people. World leaders have condemned the attack. The US has called it horrifying. Ukraine's Zelensky has described the attack as a demonstrably brutal Russian crime. On the other hand, Russia denies targeting civilians. To take this forward, we are now joined by Russian affairs expert Fred Weir and former diplomat, Ambassador Deepak Bhojwani. Thank you very much for joining us, Ambassador Bhojwani. Vladimir Putin declaring that Russia has successfully tested a nuclear-powered, nuclear-capable cruise missile. What do you feel is significant about the timing of this declaration?
Well, as we all know, President Putin has been talking about the capabilities Russia has, and he's been staring back at the West, NATO in particular, which he accuses of expanding towards Russia and, in fact, onto Russia's borders, something that he claimed even yesterday in the speech, in the intervention which you cited at the Valdai Forum. And he's always been saying that if this is the case, then we have the full right to, in fact, do what we need to defend ourselves. And if I'm not mistaken, I watched this intervention yesterday of President Putin, and he also cited the US refusal to ratify a test ban treaty, which he claimed Russia had ratified, to justify Russia's right to go ahead and develop further nuclear capabilities.
Right. Those are important points because some in Russia and some senior journalists from Russian television have also called on Putin and urged him to carry out a nuclear detonation. Fred Weir, if I were to ask you about Putin's intentions, can we say that Russia's patience in this war against Ukraine is wearing thin? What, according to you, were Putin's intentions when he made these claims?
I don't think it's correct to connect the breakdown of nuclear arms treaties and nuclear doctrine with the war in Ukraine. I think that Putin made it very clear in that same speech that Russian nuclear doctrine hasn't changed. Russia would only employ nuclear weapons in the event it was attacked by nuclear weapons as a retaliatory measure, or if the state was facing an existential crisis. Neither of those things obtain here, and so they're separate things. Russia continues its program of modernizing its nuclear arsenal, its delivery systems, which began after the United States pulled out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty, over 20 years ago now. Russia needed weapons, according to Russian military experts. They needed weapons that would be able to evade the missile defenses the United States is planning to deploy. And the Burovestnik, this nuclear-powered missile, which would have almost infinite range, is just one of many new strategic weapons that Russia is fielding. It's not a momentary thing. This program has been going on for many years, and it's not connected with the war in Ukraine.
Right. Ambassador Bhojwani, he also mentioned that it is possible for the Russian parliament to revoke the ratification of the nuclear test ban treaty. You also mentioned that. How do you think the West, the United States, the UK, the European Union are likely to respond to his claims?
Well, I can't guess what the West and the US in particular would do, but I believe there is an attempt to pin Russia down to its commitment that it will not use nuclear weapons, this commitment was in a way acknowledged in the G20 declaration, where all the G20 countries, including Russia, said that a nuclear war should not be fought and will never be. So I don't believe, my personal belief is that Russia will not ever use nuclear weapons. And I believe Mr. Weir has just stated that they haven't changed their nuclear doctrine. So the fact of the matter is that this is posturing to some extent, obviously, because a lot of this is also what public opinion will eventually arrive at. And while the reality on the ground may be very different, I think it's this kind of thing about the nuclear posturing is not relevant to the Ukraine war.
Right. So you're saying it's not relevant to the nuclear war at all, to the Ukraine war at all. But Fred, if I were to come back to you, if we discuss this latest attack that has taken place in Ukraine, where 51 people have been killed because of the Russian missile strike, how do you think the Russian action could intensify in the days to come? And what's really different this time around in this missile strike?
I think it's kind of bombarding of Ukrainian cities and infrastructure targets has been going on for a long time. There have been some terrible tragedies. There always is in war. There's no such thing as surgical strikes. Perhaps this is one of them. The Russians do claim that they actually hit an underground target in the middle of the road between those buildings. I don't know. I'm not an expert on any of these things, but of course the war is ongoing and it's been punctuated by these kind of civilian tragedies since it began, a year and a half ago, and it is horrifying and monstrous. I mean, I have no words for it, but I don't think anything new is visible in this picture.
All right, so you're saying that there's nothing new in the Russian strategy per se. How do you see the Russian offensive against Ukraine, Ambassador Bhojwani, moving from here? Are you going to see it intensifying? Do you think yesterday when he was speaking to analysts, was there a message for the West there?
Well, the only message which I found interesting, apart from, of course, the usual sort of posture that Putin has adopted, is that he did mention in response to a question, I forget from whom it was, that Odessa is Russian. Now, Odessa has been so far left out of the Russian push to the south and east of Ukraine. But to answer your question, my view is that I think the Russians will try and hold on to what gains they have made. The Crimea is nowhere near being returned, ceded, or even acknowledged as non-Russian territory. I believe that now that Russia, the last year, I believe it was, that Russia sort of annexed the eastern part of Ukraine, which it has taken physically as part of Russia. I don't believe they will give that up either. I would be surprised if Russia tried to push further. President Putin obviously knows his limitations. And it seems obvious to the rest of the world also. So I don't think he'll try and push any further. But who knows? I really can't read no one can read Mr. Putin's mind. So we really don't know what will happen. But for now, the way I see it is that the West is backing Ukraine to such an extent in terms of arms, in terms of money, in terms of almost all the kinds of support that Ukraine can expect. It's the Ukrainians who will be pushing, and the Russians, I think, are going to try and hold the line.
Right. Fred, coming back to you, would you like to respond to what Ambassador Bhojwani said? And just coming back to nuclear once again, we've also been reading reports how Russia has completed work on an intercontinental ballistic missile system which is capable of carrying at least 10 nuclear warheads on each missile. As you rightly said, Putin has said there is no change in their nuclear doctrine. They don't see any possibility of use of nuclear weapons in future. But at this juncture, what is Russia preparing for in case the need arises or things worsen as far as the war goes ahead, or they become desperate?
This Burevestnik missile that was just tested is a cruise missile which has, I mean, this is the controversial thing about it, a nuclear power plant. Its propulsion system is nuclear powered, which gives it almost infinite range. But it's a delivery system. There's another ballistic missile that I think is coming online called the Sarmat. That's the one you mentioned with 10 individual warheads. These are not nuclear weapons themselves. There's no change in the type of warhead that they deliver. It's the delivery system, which, as I said, Russia has been developing in order to evade, to get around, to defeat the missile defense systems, the anti-missile systems that the United States has begun building, has also been developing since it pulled out of the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty 2 decades ago. That's what that's about. The other moment of confusion here, I think, is about the test ban treaty. It's not about using nuclear weapons, it's about testing them actually in the atmosphere or underground, more likely, as they used to do. They stopped doing all that. And I always thought, I mean, I've heard from experts that you can simulate a nuclear blast on supercomputers just as effectively as actually detonating one. And so there's no reason really to pull out of the test ban treaty other than political showmanship. And I think that's what this is. This is political, telling the Americans, if you're doing this, we're going to do that. It's a pity, because the entire fabric of arms control that was built up during the Cold War is just falling apart, and it's mostly gone now. The test ban treaty is one of the last remaining elements, and I suppose it'll be gone soon too.
Right. Thank you very much for joining us, Fred and Ambassador Bhojwani, for that interesting discussion. Let's see what kind of turn this war takes in the days to come. We're heading into a short break, but on the other side, we discuss the trial of FTX founder Sam Bankman-Fried, which is getting increasingly heated, and we'll be discussing this with Daniel Silva of Buchalter Law Firm.